The 2025 cover of Dave Campbell's Texas Football has been revealed, with Steve Sarkisian, head coach of the Texas Longhorns, gracing the cover of the 66th annual edition of the Bible of Texas Football. And here to talk a little bit about it is the guy who wrote the cover story for this year's edition. It is Mike Craven. Mike, appreciate you taking some time. When we came to the decision as a team to put Steve Sarkisian on the cover, I'm curious, knowing that you were going to be the guy writing the story, I'm curious what your first thoughts were.
Well, I was excited. Obviously Sarkisian has a unique story, an interesting story. He's had some ups, he's had some downs. And when you're approaching a 2,500 word kind of feature story, a cover story of that magnitude, you want the subject to be interesting, right? You need some stuff to write about. And so a lot of times when I've approached these stories, it's trying to figure out 2,500 words. With Steve, it was, how do you cut this down to 2,500 words? He has a career at 50 years old that could be a book. And so it was trying to decide when to start it, when to end it, what highlights to kind of get to. And, the interview kind of dictated a lot of that.
You've written about a lot of coaches. The thing that kind of strikes me about Sarkisian is he's a particularly layered figure. There's a lot of layers to him. When you dug into his story, both in your work ahead of time and then when you talked with him in Austin, I'm curious what really stood out to you.
That it wasn't as unique as I thought, right? When we look at the great coaches across the country, I think sometimes we look at the outliers that have the success right away, or we see the finished product. But Nick Saban struggled until he was about 50 years old. Pete Carroll struggled until he was about 50 years old. And so the 7-win Sark stuff and the troubles at USC, while unique, I don't think that they're all that different than how most of these coaches do it. It takes a while to become a great coach. You have to fail a few times. You have to learn on the job. And he's done that. And so I guess that was the eye-opener to me, was while his path was his own, it doesn't seem to be all that different, and it does take these guys 10, 15, 20 years of being in that chair and being around other great coaches to kind of get the recipe down.
You mentioned, people around him, and you talked to a lot of people around the program and around Sarkisian. Was there a common thread or a common theme that kept coming up when you would talk to people about Steve Sarkisian?
Yeah, toughness. And we have a stereotype here in Texas for Californians, right? He's a quarterback. He's from California. Jordan Whittington kind of talked about it. It's you have this perception of what he's going to be. And he's not that. He's a pretty hard-nosed guy. Sometimes a little too hard-nosed, right? You saw the Alamo Bowl that one time where he got mad at the staffer, before the game. He can have that edge to him, and Texas needed that. Right. And that's the part that I think was fascinating, was coaches can be different, but they need to be themselves. And I think what everybody was telling me was that Sarkisian told me this himself, he figured out how to just be himself. He stopped trying to be Pete Carroll. He stopped trying to be Nick Saban. He just wanted to be Steve Sarkisian. And Steve Sarkisian's a pretty tough, hard-nosed, no-nonsense football coach. And he demanded of himself that the next time he got the opportunity, he was going to build a program in his image. And I think he feels like he's on track to doing that at Texas.
And that actually brings up my next question, which is about how he's changed. Obviously, you mentioned the 7-win Sark thing. It didn't go well at USC. It ended pretty poorly. I know you talked with him about him maybe even leaving coaching semi permanently before kind of an opportunity arose for him. In talking with him, how has his maybe leadership or just his style changed that has allowed him to be more successful, certainly, than he was in his previous stops?
I think he became more vulnerable, more honest. He talked a lot about Culture Wednesdays and how that changed Texas. And what they do on Wednesdays is they break out into groups and they just tell each other stories, what they've gone through, the good, the bad. And Sarkisian started that by doing an hour-long speech in front of the Texas program in 2022 in the summer. And it wasn't the PG version, as he described it to me. It was the R-rated, here is everything, because how can I ask a 20-year-old to share their life story if me at 45 can't share mine? And he was like, I know they have Google and they can go see kind of my story, but they need to hear it from me. And so I think he just became more vulnerable. He became more honest. I think that's helped him handle some adversity. He's admitted that in the past, it was the bad stuff that kind of got him down, a bad loss or whatever, would send him down, maybe a poor path. I think now he handles that better. He has a better support system around him. I think he's more mature, and we all get that way as we grow up. And so, yeah, I think it's a lot of things. I think he's just more comfortable with himself, and that's allowed him to be more comfortable with the ups and downs that come with being a high-level head coach.
And being a high-level head coach at the University of Texas, where there is not just you're already an FBS head coach and you're already a Power 4 head coach, but you are also the head coach of the University of Texas, and you're the University of Texas heading into 2025, where there are big expectations and big pressure. In your conversation with him, do you get the feeling that he's embracing that pressure, or he's trying to block that out? What's his strategy heading into 2025?
Yeah, I think he's embracing it, and it's why he got hired. Like Chris Del Conte told me specifically, they went with Steve Sarkisian because he had seen it done at big-time programs, right? He had been at USC. He had been at Alabama. He knew the gravitas of the Texas job, according to Chris Del Conte. He had been in the NFL, and I think that served him well in the transfer portal and NIL market that kind of came about during his tenure. He was the perfect fit for that. So I don't think this job is too big for him. He's already failed on the biggest stages, right? Like most of us are afraid of our biggest failures or our biggest potential failures. Well, Steve Sarkisian's already had a very high profile public fall from grace at a major university. Like what else could go wrong? Like what else could be bigger than that? And I think that there's a kind of a bravery and a courage that comes from that. I've been through some personal stuff as well that kind of just, you hit rock bottom, you come out of it, and then you're like, well, you're not made of glass, and you can handle that stuff. And so I don't think the pressure to him at Texas is as big as maybe we think it is, because he's done some life stuff that makes it pale in comparison.
And finally, this is a story that it's not just a story about Texas football. It's also about what kind of Texas football means. And Sarkisian is obviously a big puzzle piece, not just in the state of Texas, but in the national college football landscape. I'm curious how you feel like Sarkisian fits in that bigger narrative of football, whether it's in Texas or it's nationally, where his role is right now.
Yeah, I think he's next. Right. Like, I think for a long time, Nick Saban was the figurehead of college football, and then it's become Kirby Smart. And I think Sarkisian's there with like a Ryan Day and a Dan Lanning, where he's going to be kind of the next face of college football, especially at a program like Texas with all the resources, the way that they recruit. They're probably going to be the national number one team in the country this year. And if not, they're going to be playing the national number one team in the country in week 1. And so I think he's going to be somebody who leads this sport and is a figurehead for this sport, and his opinion's going to matter a lot for the sport. And being in the SEC allows him to kind of have that voice.
He's Mike Craven. He is our senior writer here at Dave Campbell's Texas Football, and he is the guy who penned the cover story of the 2025 summer edition of Dave Campbell's Texas Football on Steve Sarkisian. Mike, appreciate your time, my friend.
Thanks, sir.